There's nothing to hide.
There's nothing to hide at all.
Welcome, everyone, to Somewhere in the Live Stream Redux Episode 8. I am your host, Ryan Sprague, and we do have a special co-host, special guest tonight as well. First of all, I want to say a big hello to all of our regulars, all of our new people that are here tonight. Welcome. This is a live stream we do here every Sunday through the Somewhere in the Skies podcast, where we break down the latest UFO news, headlines, space news, tech news, and some podcast highlights of the week as well from shows that cover things like UAP, like UFOs, the paranormal, things like that. Before we go any further, I do want to give a very special happy birthday to my sister back home in New York, Christy Sprague. Happy birthday to you. I hope you're spending it with all of your friends and family and having a wonderful time back there in New York. So giving a huge shout out to my sister all the way here in Scotland. So happy birthday, Christy. I do want to say off the bat, I'm a little surprised. Twitter, apparently now you can't stream on Twitter unless you have a premium account. They just told me this as I was going live. So thanks, Elon. Thanks for that, buddy. But if you are watching this here on YouTube, I want to give you a huge thank you. And yeah, let's say hello to some of our regulars before we bring in our special guest. Vintage Rebellion is here. The Biologist, Dalen, is here. Ian Smith, Photography by Ruth. Who else we got? Pat Gallagher is here. Super Green is here. Hi from vacation in south of Germany. Oh, that's so cool. Thanks for being here, man, on your vacation. Doc Casper is here. We have Felix as well. Hello to all of you guys. Thank you. Thanks for hanging out with us here on your Sunday night. All Work Low Pay is here as well. What else do I have here? Oh, the Super Chat and Super Stickers are open. If you would like to help out the show, that is a quick, easy, immediate way to do so. All of the content we produce here at Somewhere in the Skies and Somewhere in the Live Stream is free for you to consume, but it's not free for us to create. So every penny goes right back into helping us continue these live streams and continue the Somewhere in the Skies podcast. So you can use that super chat to ask us questions tonight, give your comments or super stickers, or you could join our Patreon campaign. That is where you get bonus episodes of the podcast. You get early access to the show. You get ad-free content and everything in between. So if you would like to help the show that way, you can do that as well. Patreon.com/SomewhereSkies. If you can't help us out monetarily, completely fine. All we ask is that you click like on this video right here, right now. Click subscribe, turn on notifications, all that good stuff to boost us up in those algorithms. And yeah, that's it for Talking Shop, guys. So before we get to the news, without further ado, let's bring in our special guest co-host for tonight. And that is the one, the only Daniel Zetterström. What's up, buddy?
Hey, man. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. There's been so much happening this week. It's been a little overwhelming, but also kudos for not paying Daddy Musk that premium fee as well. Just the features that he took away.
Not yet. I hope I don't give him any more of my money. But yeah, man, we'll see what happens. But no, thank you for being here tonight. I really do appreciate you taking the time to break down all this latest news. And you're right, there's a lot going on. You know, I think I was listening to That UFO Podcast this week, and you guys had your breakdown over there.
Uh-huh.
And you guys made the good point that there's not like explosive bombshells happening. Like we don't have a Grush thing coming out. We haven't found the bodies or the craft or anything like that yet. But there are things going on under the surface, things bubbling and waiting to happen. Some of which we'll talk to tonight. We have some updates on some stories that I talked about on the live stream a few weeks ago. So we're going to get into that. But I do want to briefly, as brief as we possibly can, talk about the elephant in the room. I think it would be irresponsible if we did not mention what happened yesterday, unfortunately, in the United States, where former President Trump was shot at. And someone actually did die, a person that was in the audience. Someone else was injured. The shooter is allegedly dead. But yeah, man, crazy times we're living in. And I know you guys talked about how the election was going to be the big news, keeping UFOs
Yeah.
out of the headlines. I think we now have another story that's going to keep the entire world busy for the next few months. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd see that picture of Trump with the American flag behind him, blood down his face. You can't pay for promotion that good. And this is going to become, an election talking point, and it won't be dropped. And this is what people are talking about. It's really in the midst of this. They're not going to answer UFO questions, right? They're going to be talking about getting reelected and getting votes and staying on issues. So I think that we're not going to see it come up along the way. And I think maybe, we'll touch on it later when we get to the Schumer stuff of the UAP Disclosure Act stuff. But maybe that kind of having a little bit of stealth and kind of going under the radar will be a good thing.
I have to agree. It's a lot of UFO work. The best work is done in the shadows. I've noticed, people like Dean Johnson, who we're going to bring up, and these people who aren't like really out there shouting it from the rooftops. When they
Mhm.
have information to give, they'll give it.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be the way it's going to go. But yeah, I did think we should at least acknowledge what happened yesterday, instead of just ignoring,
Yeah.
the obvious elephant in the room. But this will inevitably put I think, kind of a halt on any presidential talk on
Yeah.
UFOs moving
And
forward.
just to be clear for the audience, and I know that you'll be in the same boat, completely disavow violence in any realm, let alone the political realm. It is not the way. If you want to beat someone, you do it at the election booth.
100%. I couldn't agree more with you, man. Um, all right. Well, on to better news happening in the United States, I guess, and abroad. Let's get to this first story. I have my infamous slideshow that I pull up here, Dan. I'm sure you remember
Nice.
these. Still doing them. Let's talk SETI. We haven't heard or seen anything from SETI in a while. So I'm going to go ahead and read a little from this article that just came out, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Sure.
New SETI grants could shape the search for alien technology. So, the SETI Institute's new grant program supports advanced research in detecting ET technosignatures, with grants up to $100,000, leveraging the capabilities of the Allen Telescope Array. Were you at the Allen Telescope Array, Dan, or was that photo you have from a different
It was a
satellite?
different one. So it's from the VLA.
Okay,
That's
okay.
that's the telescope that if you watch Contact,
Yes.
it's the telescope you see there. And a number of those dishes in Contact, they don't have that many dishes there. They were
Okay.
all CG, but they are expanding that in the coming years, which will be part of this SETI initiative.
There you go. There you go. We tied it all in. I just remember seeing your profile photo. I'm like, oh, he's gonna like this story.
Yeah,
Um,
very much.
I'll continue here. The SETI Institute has introduced a groundbreaking grant program focused on advancing technosignature science. This unique initiative is designed to fund innovative research that tackles essential observational, theoretical, and technical challenges in the quest for technosignatures, which may reveal signs of past or present ET technology. Um, what's cool about this too, Dan, is there's a lot of different ways that you can get the grant, like
Mhm.
approaches you can take within this. So I'm going to read these off and then we're going to go right into your thoughts on it. So observational programs or the development of observational techniques and strategies for detecting technosignatures. That's one. Two, theoretical models that predict or explain technosignature phenomena. Three, technical innovations that enhance the capability to detect and analyze technosignatures. And four, research at the intersection of social sciences and technosignatures research, exploring the societal implications and human factors related to the search for technosignatures. Applications due today, guys, so it might be a little late to get it in, but we will have successful applicants will be notified by August 5th. So that's pretty darn quick, if you ask me, to get this
Yeah.
grant. So yeah, what do you make of this new initiative by SETI, and do you think it'll lead to anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. I think there's some negative stuff, some positive stuff, but I'll
Mhm.
just kind of go through it. I think this is a testament to the UAP conversation over the last few years, the legislation, Galileo project, all those things rolling out, like the Sol Foundation too, making the conversation okay to have in the public sphere. You wind the clock back 15 years and this kind of initiative gets an eye roll. Whereas now they're funding it. And this is what we want, is for scientists to take it seriously and to look at it. Part of the advancements that we're making, there's a telescope that I've got my eye on, and I know Avi Loeb talks about it often, is the Vera Rubin Observatory. And this is a really cool telescope because before, if you think back to that Hubble Deep Field picture that was taken, in the 90s, maybe before, I can't remember an exact date, but that was, a postage stamp size scan of the sky. And we see how many galaxies are there that we didn't think we were going to see.
Mhm.
Whereas the Vera Rubin doesn't take a postage stamp of picture of the sky. It scans the whole sky every 4 days. So that's a wealth of data for astronomers to start going through and combing through and applying AI and applying all of these kind of grant initiatives to look through the data. And it's going to be so much more powerful and so much more productive than what we'd had before, that it's almost a completely new era of, radio telescope observations and things like that. But I would say the negative is that we're still looking for life as we know it. And what are the chances that another species that's developed completely in a different environment, on a different planet, in a different part of the cosmos, what are the chances they're going to be like us? What are the chances they're going to use radio? It's really, really slim. And it brings to mind another initiative that's called SETI, but it's CETI, and it's all about cetaceans and whale song, and kind of trying to apply AI to decipher whale song. And it's been in the news for, a couple of times over the past year or so, where we thought the whales had maybe 25 sounds they could make, and now we're realizing that they actually put words together in sentence structures very similar to what we do, but with these different sounds. But we're starting to get an appreciation of how complex that society is, that culture is, and an appreciation that even on this planet, another form of life having 47 million years of evolution in a completely different environment may as well make them alien to us. The language appears very complex, as I said, and it's kind of a clue that other species could communicate and live in completely different ways. It brings to mind gravity waves.
Right.
If we were really advanced, we'd be able to use gravity waves to communicate, and through these ripples across the cosmos, and it will be a lot less noticeable than something like a radio wave. But only 10 years ago, scientists laughed at gravity waves. They thought they didn't exist. Same with black holes, and now here we are. I've got an app on my phone that alerts me every 5 seconds that there's a gravity wave detected and that we can see where it comes from. It's insane, right? On my phone.
Wow.
So we're starting to appreciate that these things can happen in different ways. And we've just got to think about what are we missing by focusing only on life as we know it. We keep finding life in places that we don't expect it. If anyone's interested, just do a little Google search for extremophiles. And these are just bits of life, microbes, everything else, that survive in places that we think it wasn't possible to survive, because we live in this little slim slither along, on the outside of the planet. And when we go outside of that, we got to build these suits and these pressure vessels. If you go into the ocean or into space, we've got to enhance ourselves by putting these different sensor suites on ourselves. And I find that really interesting. What if something communicates in such an alien way that it's something like they send a virus and we think it's a virus, but they see it as like a, hey, we're here, and that's how they know how to do it. One person that I'm fascinated by their work, and I should say two people actually, because there's two people working on it, is Sarah Amara Walker and Lee Croning. They're looking at redefining what we think of as life, redefining the kind of the fingerprints of what we think of as life. And their idea is something called assembly theory, where you can kind of track a molecule as it's changed through its history. And when it gets to a certain complexity, that's when life seems to emerge. But it's not beholden to being similar to life on this planet. They're open, and they change in that conversation. And already they're having an impact, and it's really interesting. If you go between all of the different scientific disciplines, they almost all have a different definition of life. And that was why when we did the Mars Viking lander, and they thought that they found life on it and they might have destroyed it and so on and so forth, it was difficult for them to say, yes, we found life, because they don't have a definition of what life is. So unless we find something that just, looks like an octopus, or looks like a mushroom on another planet, we're going to completely miss it. So all of these initiatives are incredible, and I think they're going to feed into the UFO and UAP conversation even more than they did before. And it's just so great to see scientists taking it seriously and trying to apply the things that they know to it,
Yeah. Absolutely. And this idea of like sourcing information too, I think is essential. Like getting people from the outside to come in and help SETI try to understand how they could better look for techno signatures or stuff like that. Like we're seeing that a lot now with a lot of different institutes and organizations being like, hey guys, like we need a hand with this.
Yeah.
Look at all the citizen like astronomy groups that are out there too. Like, help us map the universe, please,
Yeah.
because we have limited funds to do this, and we have even limited like our own minds. Our minds are our limitation, Dan, in so many ways.
Yes.
So, like, let's get more minds on this sort of stuff. So that's
Yeah,
exciting
you
too. I
you
think.
touch on something really important there, that our minds are a limitation. You
Mhm.
know, we have five senses. You look at different cultures going back in time, and like the Egyptians thought we had more than five senses, and so on and so forth. So we really need to appreciate that what is visible to us is actually this really thin, tiny slither of the electromagnetic spectrum, to the point where when we're looking out into the universe with infrared telescopes, we're realizing there are stars that are invisible to us, to our naked eye. And that's kind of insane, right? That's an invisible world there, right there.
Right.
Almost like what Gary Nolan refers to as a shadow biosphere. You know, microbes were there before we got telescopes to look at them. So
Mhm.
it's really interesting to think of like a microscope or a telescope as a dimensional window to seeing something that we can't normally see.
Right. Could you imagine that first like microbe noticing a microscope on them and like
Yeah,
stopping what they're doing and be like, I gotta deal with this now? Like,
yeah.
come on.
And you can get really nerdy with it. You know, if you, I think it was John Keel kind of used this example as well. I'm just gonna, ad lib. He was saying, if you're a microbe and the scale that you exist on is you might survive for a few hours. That's how long you're alive, so to
Mhm.
speak. Whereas if a lab technician puts like a syringe into the mixture with that microbe is going to experience, that little thin slice of the syringe coming in, and then it's going to die off. Now imagine that microbe could talk to its fellow microbes and say, "Oh, I found this crazy thing today. It just appeared and then it went away." Then generations of microbes pass before the technician in his time, 1 minute later, puts the syringe back in again. And it's kind of like this reflection of what we're kind of going through on Earth, kind of looking at these things that we experience. For example, we have Tic Tacs kind of appearing in the 40s and 50s, and now they're appearing today. Is it a different thing, or is it just from its point of view, it's skipping around time, and the Nimitz came right after an encounter in the 40s? It's
Mhm.
fascinating to think about, and it turns my brain to dribble.
Oh, yeah, I know. My mind is going all ping pong right now. I love it. I love it. Thank you, SETI. Thank you for taking a chance and asking the public to become a part of this. I
Yeah.
think it's essential. Let's move to a fun story, Dan. Now, did you pay any attention to the furry UFO story that came out last month?
It completely passed me by. And
Okay.
when you said we were going to cover it today, I thought I won't dive into it because I think it's important to, talk about our bubbles and how information doesn't permeate them and so on and so
Yeah,
forth.
yeah,
So
yeah.
school me, please.
Yeah, so let me see if I have, let's see here. I don't know the exact date when it happened, but this story came to us from a glamping collective in
Nice.
North Carolina, of all places, where a witness found this piece of what he believed to be metal, like a huge just piece of metal debris, and it had some sort of like furry, almost fiber-esque material all over it, and he had no idea what it was. It was huge, it was massive. Let me see if I have a photo here. I kind of do. Let me bring in the slideshow, um, and we'll take a look at it here. There we go.
Ooh.
So that was the original witness. Let me see if I have his name here. Uh, I do not, unfortunately. But we did cover it a few weeks ago. But yeah, man, that's what he found. Like this honking piece of steel or something. Definitely looks man-made if you look at the bolts and everything on it.
Yeah.
But it also had like this strange furry kind of covering around it. So he wanted to know what it was. He started talking to people, got in touch with some aerospace folks, and it seems that now the mystery is solved by none other than NASA. So, yeah, let me go ahead and read this update on the furry UFO. The mystery of a massive furry UFO found in North Carolina has been solved. For weeks, staff at the Glamping Collective in North Carolina were left scratching their heads when this huge mechanical mass wrapped in what seemed to be fur was found on their property. NASA has now revealed it as, quote, falling space junk, and identifying the remnants as part of a SpaceX satellite, specifically the Crew Dragon capsule that docked with the International Space Station last year. So again, thanks, Elon. According to NASA, quote, during its initial design, the Dragon spacecraft trunk was evaluated for re-entry breakup and was predicted to burn up fully. The information from the debris recovery provides an opportunity for teams to improve debris modeling. The trunks used in this mission had re-entered over Saudi Arabia and North Carolina, respectively. As for the furry appearance, it was actually caused by frayed carbon fibers. And lastly, Dan, this is kind of what I want to talk to you about in reference to this story. According to NASA, in a recent study, debris emanating from worn out satellites, spacecraft, and booster rockets potentially pose a lethal threat to individuals. Data reveals an alarming increase since 2010, with roughly 1,000 pieces of space debris, larger than 1 square meter, hurling uncontrolled through the atmosphere. So, dude, I'm going to just say off the bat, what if this had hit somebody?
Yeah. Like
You know?
did you see the videos from a rocket launch in China a few weeks back, where it was they were
So.
testing the rocket and it accidentally launched, and then it just
Yep.
fell on a house.
Yeah.
You know, like they're very different, but it's a concern because even though we can track these things and we have math that kind of says where they're going to land, things get missed and this
Yeah.
happens. And if you're, this guy clearly was unfamiliar with the material, and so it was anomalous to him, and he expressed that, and I really respect that. He listened to the answer, he got in touch with the experts, and so on and so forth. Also funny that NASA, sometimes called never a straight answer, actually gave a straight answer in this case.
Right.
All of these bits of debris are tracks. You can go kind of online and look at them, and inevitably there are ones that they don't share with us that are classified satellites and things like that. But what goes up must come down. So we clearly need to get better at letting people know what this stuff is, getting better at the cleanup, getting better at the tracking. But it's important also that when experts like those at NASA give us answers, that we don't just go, you're involved in a conspiracy, therefore it's not true. Because these organizations aren't like homogenous things of just, a ball of flesh. There are people in different departments and so on and so forth. So you got to kind of judge everyone by their own merits. And it's important to defer sometimes. I always say this subject kind of means that you have to learn so much about all these different kind of fields. And like, I don't know about you, but I feel like I've had a hell of an education since kind of getting into this, so that I don't confuse like lens flares and meteors and space junk and so on and so forth. We see often, pilots, there was that racetrack UAP kind of debacle that happened a while back where pilots were seeing anomalous things. And it was thought that, reasonably accurately, that stuff was, or some of them were identified as Starlink. Now, Starlink's a really new thing. And I mention it because the pilots weren't experienced at seeing it, and therefore it looked anomalous and they reported it. And that's what we want. That this is what, all the UAP legislation is kind of giving us the means to do, is to take these things seriously. And in this instance, it could save someone's life. It's really important that we do this stuff. And you mentioned civilian or citizen science, during the last story. And did you know that like a lot of meteor tracking networks are run completely voluntarily? In the UK, there's a whole bunch of cameras and they all watch the sky for meteors, but everyone that works on them is a volunteer. And that's kind of insane to me. Like, this is a planetary defense thing. And, they've got satellites up there kind of tracking things. So it's just like, we kind of need to be a bit more transparent so that we can actually help each other track these things. And then we'll have situations like the Chinese balloon where it was spotted by a citizen and then shot down by the government. And, that was a really interesting microcosm. But it also reminds me of, you no doubt know Charles Fort, known for kind of establishing the Fortean approach to these anomalous bits of science, to kind of say, well, it happened, therefore we have to investigate it and take it seriously instead of just fooeying it. And there's a book he wrote called The Book of the Damned, and there's a really interesting section where he talks about how we kind of came to terms with meteors existing. And there were all these farmers in France kind of grabbing these rocks from their farm and saying, look, this fell from the sky. And no one believed them. The
Right.
head astronomer at the time, something Lestrange, said that there are no rocks in the sky, therefore rocks cannot fall from the sky. So you can see how the assumed knowledge there was limiting them from appreciating what's up there. And, think now what we're seeing with the James Webb Telescope and things like that. There aren't just rocks in the sky. There are invisible planets and quasars and all these really, really cool things that we just didn't know existed before. So I think it's important to, entertain these stories and help people get answers and defer to the experts and learn along the way and just do our best. Because, we're all just kind of struggling along here trying to grab these anomalous things and describe them. And the more we can take off the table, the smaller the data pile is for the anomalous UAPs that we want to study.
Absolutely. Yeah. Furry UFOs notwithstanding, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've come a long way from rocks don't fall from the sky.
We
I'll give
have.
you that. I'll give you that. Let's continue with rocks. Ooh, swish on the
Nice. I
transition.
like
Dan.
that.
Update on the Red Rocks, Colorado UFO sighting. Let's move to our next story. So, this was back on June, I believe it was June 5th. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, June 5th. Earlier last month, a report came into the National UFO Reporting Center out of Denver, Colorado. The report came out of Denver, I should say. Witnesses reported a large disc-shaped craft with 3 levels of windows hovering above the treetops. This was witnessed by at least 12 employees of the Red Rocks Amphitheater. Many wondered how so many people saw it and nobody took videos or pictures. Dan, the number one question any skeptic
Yeah.
uses, and a very, very viable question indeed. And many also thought that this could have been a prank or this could have been a hoax. But the original witness who reported it has come forward and denies that this was a prank or a hoax. Michael Lehman, who was working as a stagehand at Red Rocks, said that on June 5th, as he was loading out equipment, the following happened. And I'm going to read the exact quote from him here. I was working there when one of the loaders said, "Hey, what's that up in the sky? Looks like a spaceship." A dozen or so others on the crew all looked up, and we all said, "Holy shit, dude." There were about 15 bright white lights stacked 3 high, and they're going
Wow.
around this thing, and the lights could help you see its shape. It seemed to be a black oval disc several hundred feet long. It tipped, moved about the length of itself, and then disappeared. And then the last quote here, Dan, as for no photos or videos, the witness said, "We're loading a semi. Our hands are full, and it happened so quickly. We really didn't know what we were looking at. It was maybe 30, 40 seconds total. The equipment is so heavy, and we all have to be on the same page so we don't hurt ourselves or damage anything. It would be dangerous to stop and take out our phones." And lastly, he does conclude this was not a plane. It wasn't a satellite, a drone, or anything like that. There was no mistaking what this was. We all saw a giant disc-shaped craft hovering a few hundred feet above the ground with 3 rows of windows and lights. Then we all saw it fade into nothing as soon as it knew it was being watched, essentially, is what he said. So a lot to unpack there. I mean, first of all, this is like a crazy classic flying saucer sighting in 2024. And then this thing just fades in like the blink of an eye. So Dan, I know you've been to Red Rocks, to the amphitheater.
Yeah.
I've been there as well. Gorgeous,
Stunning, right?
gorgeous venue. And it does not surprise me that if there were
No.
some interplanetary craft that it would want to visit Red Rocks. So yeah, man, what do you make? What do you make of this entire story?
It was amazing. Like when I first heard it, I pretty much reacted the same as other people, where I was like, "Where are the pics? Where are these?" And the more you read and the more you listen to the witnesses, and the more you look at the venue as well, and you can see that when you're in those seats, you can see for miles and miles and miles, especially when it's clear sky. So it's no surprise. Like, it's a really good point to go UFO spotting or stargazing. It's in the middle of nowhere. You'll see the Milky Way. There are less lights kind of messing with them. But the witnesses not getting the phone out, that comes up time and time again in UFO encounters, and it's been referred to as a kind of euphoria, spelled UFORIA, where you're just so transfixed in the moment, and you almost don't want to look away for fear of missing something. And that even goes to grabbing your phone. And then it's easy to sit back and say, oh, why didn't you grab your phone and take pictures? But like you said, the loading dock, that's a really dangerous place. And if you've ever struck a stage for theater or for performances, then you'll know that needs to be a smooth operation where everybody is paying attention, because when things go wrong, they go badly wrong, and people get limbs crushed, killed, all sorts. I spoke to a guy who once kind of struck lighting in a venue that was local to me in Cardiff. And I said, aren't you scared of like falling or getting crushed? And he said, well, it's only going to happen once, which was hilarious gallows humor.
Ooh.
But, it kind of sets the tone, right? Like it's only going to happen once and then you're gone. So you really need to pay attention to what you're doing. Plus, I've seen weird things in the sky, and I've had my phone in my pocket and I haven't thought to take it out, because you're in your head kind of playing, Guess Who? You're like, is there a satellite? No, it's moving differently. Put that down. Is there a plane? No, it's moving differently. Check your plane tracker. No, it's not that. And you're doing that. And then by the time you're done with that, it disappears. And it's really interesting that they said that it tipped an angle and then disappeared, because we hear about that time and time again, right? Bob Lazar mentioned that way back when. Dave Fravor kind of mentioned it. Countless sightings. One of my favorite videos from the Gulf Breeze sightings, which many of them were a hoax, but there are a few videos there that just, have never been proven to be a hoax. One specifically where you kind of see the UFO and then it zips off. And if you go frame by frame, you can see that, it's not disappeared. It's just left really fast, and you can kind of see the blur as it leaves. There's also the possibility that this could be a back engineered craft, right? AARO has spoken so many times about, we want to use the technology for our own gain. If there's something that can be discerned from this, a sighting, then it lets them know that you can do it. So there are going to be physicists working on it. But what fascinates me is that it knew it was being watched. Like that line, it knew it was being watched. And that suggests maybe something alive, maybe something that, it makes me think of snipers when they're, terrible timing, but they always say that they never train their scope on the target until they're actually going to fire the shot, because people get spooked. They have a sense that they're being watched. And, science hasn't thus far figured out whether that's true or what it is. It's this intuitive sense, but there's no reason why it couldn't be the same. If it was something like in Nope, where it's like a really rare form of, sky kind of aquatic life or something, then maybe it did know it was being watched and kind of scarp it off. But as long as no one starts feeding it horses and people, we should be good.
Yeah. Or I guess playing Imagine Dragons at the amphitheater or something. I don't know, man.
It's also real interesting. I always bring this up because I found it fascinating. The ending of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where it's kind of the communication between the aliens and the humans devolves into like this elegant dance of light and sound.
Right.
And light and sound, that's just frequency. If I said to you, they're communicating frequency, it sounds spiritual and weird, but light and sound are just different bits of frequency along the electromagnetic spectrum. So it would make sense that something would plug into that to kind of, respond. And who knows, maybe the band, I think it was All Time Low that were playing that night, maybe they hit a chord that, echoed out into the universe and made something go, oh, what's that? And come over. Your guess is as good as mine, but it's fascinating.
Of all the bands that could have made contact, I can't believe it's All Time Low, but I'll take it. I'll take it. We're staying in that pop punk sort of arena for sure, man. You bring up so many good points, especially this idea of like the belly up scenario of a UFO not propelling itself so much, but being pulled, inertia or anti-gravity or something. That's kind of what this case reeks of to me. It was just doing the classic hovering thing and then turns belly up and then disappears. That's so fascinating to me that we're seeing that in 2024 after people throughout the decades have said that this is how some of these craft operate. So this is a great case. This is
it's thought that it's like that they fall along a vector. And it makes me laugh when I remember, I can't remember what it was, but someone asked David Fravor, who encountered the Tic Tac with Alex Dietrich and a couple of other people. They asked him, do you want to fly this thing? And he was like, hell yeah, I'd love to fly it. But he wouldn't be flying it, right? If it's falling, it must be really boring to fly if you can't feel anything inside it. And there are passages in the Secret Machines books produced by TTSA, or To the Stars, I should say, where the guy that gets to fly one says that he's like, it's really boring. You don't even feel the speed when you're moving. There's no acceleration. You know, it
Yeah.
might as well just be screens that you're looking at.
Right. He's just in his little warp bubble playing
Yeah.
some game on his phone while he's transversing the freaking planet. I love it. I love it. Cool. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad we're getting more witnesses coming forward on this case. Maybe we will eventually get a photo or a
Yeah.
video of the Red Rocks UFO. One can
And
hope. One can
and
hope.
let's be honest as well. If you know, we've seen countless pictures of lights in the sky. They're always hard to see what it is. So
Yeah.
chances are a picture isn't going to change this conversation. But it does remind us, take witnesses seriously. Just because they didn't take a picture doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Absolutely. They're part of the data, man. They're part of the data. Let's move to this interesting story. It seems that these initiatives, these groups, these institutions are popping up left and right, man. I can't make sense of all of them. There's too many to even count, but we now have a new one, and this is the Non Human Intelligence Research Institute.
Catchy.
Yeah, right. I like it. I like it. I'll pull up. I think I have a slide for this one. Ooh, this is going to be a fun one. The non-human, let's just do the acronym, NHIR, based in Australia, announced the launch of the UAP I almost said interplanetary. I swear I didn't mean to do that. UAP Interparliamentary Alliance. This international initiative seeks to unite a cross-party group of legislators to foster transparency, scientific research, and global collaboration on UAP. This is being spearheaded by Dr. Anton Uvarov and head of projects Ross Coulthard. I have a slide here on the screen, Dan. I don't want to go through all of it, but let me go ahead and read just a few of the things
Sure.
here about the initiative before I get your thoughts here. The benefits of the Interparliamentary Alliance. Let's skip down to that. Guys, if you're watching this, we have slides for you. If you're just listening, head on over to YouTube and you get a little visual here. The primary benefit of the alliance is its potential to unify diverse political perspectives under a common goal. Man, could we use that right now?
Yeah.
In collaborating internationally, the alliance aims to promote transparency and scientific inquiry into UAP phenomena, enhance international security through shared information and coordinated responses, foster a well-informed and educated public discourse on UAP issues, engagement with global parliamentarians, and drawing on this to advance policies in relation to UAP for the betterment of communities around the globe. So yeah, that's all I'm gonna read, Dan. But yeah, what do you make of this, man? Ross Coulthard, is in the news left and right. Big UFOs hidden somewhere here. Non-human
Yeah.
intelligence over here. We're gonna show a clip from News Nation later. He's working over there too. The guy is just all over the place when it comes to
Yeah.
UAP. So what do you make of the NHIR in this new alliance initiative?
Well, the tantalizing bit of it for me is that, you know, there's an intelligence sharing agreement between 5 different countries. I always forget which one. The USA, Canada, the UK, Australia, and I want to say New Zealand. It's
Yes, that's
5 there.
correct. Five
And
Eyes, baby.
there you go. And they all share intelligence on these things. And we've seen Australia deny that they were AARO briefing
Mhm.
on UAP, and then that was shown that they actually were there, and they were just kind of they didn't want to say for whatever reason. So
Shout out to Grant Lavac. Apologies
yes,
to him. But
amazing.
Grant was one of the people that was able to dig that up and get him to finally admit, yeah, we were there. Yeah.
Yeah, and all of this kind of snowballs into initiatives like this, where groups of people who are concerned that the government aren't being transparent with them about things that supposedly, as long as they don't talk about the sensors, they should be fine to talk about what they've captured. They're just denying it, and they're making it harder. And the harder they make it, the more people feel driven to kind of get this information out. And we're seeing groups like, the UAP Disclosure Foundation in America was just founded and did an amazing petition, and they're kind of trying to get things moving. And we need that kind of effort, but in other countries, the kind of publicly made organizations. And it's incredible to see Australia, really going for it with this. And Ross, people often badmouth him for not sharing, certain bits of information and stuff, but he's putting himself out there and he's putting his money where his mouth is, and he's doing the work that's required to keep this conversation at a high level. Gone are the days where we need to have these conversations in forums in the, dark corners of the internet. We can now have them in Parliament. And this is the kind of organization that's going to lead to more conversation, more people being interested. And it's an apparatus where, if there was an official in Parliament, they can go and be informed now. And they're going to have a much easier time getting through all of that muddy water, being concisely kind of briefed. And I use that word loosely because, I don't want to use it like Stephen Greer uses it, where he's like, I had a conversation with someone, and he says they were briefed. And that muddies the waters, but it's amazing. Like we need more of these in other countries, and it would be insanely cool if in 5 years we could look and go, you know what, every country on the planet has a UAP organization that's public and transparent and independent, that are really kind of data sharing and sharing their pieces of the puzzle so that we can try and put this together and figure out a solution.
Yeah, because right now we're seeing, like you said, these organizations pop up, but they're not sharing the information. I mean, you have the Sky Canada project, for instance, this scientific-based research project going on over there, a study, I should say. And they said, yeah, we'll share some of the info with like the U.S., but that's about it. Like, we're not going to stretch it any further across the Five Eyes or anywhere else. So you do see this fracture when it comes to whatever the U.S. doing AARO, Sky Canada project. Japan is starting their own thing as well. And you can bet like they're probably not going to share a lot of the information that they get. China is doing a UFO thing with AI, I believe. That was a long time ago that they announced that. So again, I think any initiative or alliance that's going to bring countries together to like share information on UAP, the better. I know national security is the biggest threat to that transparency by any government, I guess. Yeah, I think it's great. Like the more initiatives, the better. As long as like you're not like, taking advantage of the funding that you get for anything, which we've unfortunately seen throughout the years with a lot of organizations. But I'll say right now, like a lot of these are like, look, take it or leave it. We want to do this initiative. If you want to help us out, great. If you don't, like, move on to somewhere else to get your UAP information. There's enough outlets to do it. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all it's a big testament to, we're waiting for the government to disclose at the moment. And this is just a testament to, we don't have to wait for the government for shit, excuse my French, but we can get on with it through citizen science. These technologies are democratized now, they're accessible and they're cheaper than ever. So yeah, like I'm loving seeing how many organizations popping up and how many people are putting UAP tracking kits on their trucks and going out there and doing it. And, like I said earlier, the Chinese weather balloon, that was found by just a citizen that was looking at the sky. What else could they find?
Yeah. The possibilities are endless, my friend. They are. Let me see the next steps for the initiative. I want to read this. We are in the process of finalizing our organizational structure and meeting with key stakeholders. As we move forward, we remain open to feedback and suggestions from our members to ensure the Alliance's objectives are met effectively. We look forward to the positive impact the NHIR will have on the global understanding of UAP phenomena and to working collaboratively with parliamentarians to develop policies which serve and protect communities around the world. I think that's great. Yeah, absolutely, man. Anything else, Dan, before we move to our final two stories?
No, let's jump in.
Let's jump in, man. Before we do that, I'm going to take just a brief intermission, as it were, if we're going to go back to our theater terms, and play a brief commercial here, Dan. We'll reset the room. Everyone get a drink of water. Pee if you have to, but make it quick because this is a quick commercial. And we're going to come back with our last two big stories and some podcast highlights of the week. We are here with Dan Zetterström, guys, and we will be right back. The Somewhere in the Skies podcast is free to listen to every week, but if you would like to help support the show, we have a very active Patreon page where you give what you think the show is worth. In return, you'll get early access to the main show, bonus episodes, and priority to ask our guests your listener questions. Your support truly makes the show continue and grow. So, to learn more and to join, visit patreon.com/somewhereskies. All right, we are back. I told you it would be brief, guys, but let's do it, Dan. Let's move to some of the bigger stories that have hit the headlines recently. This one actually coming out yesterday, which is pretty cool, from none other than Dean Johnson, who, guys, if you're not following him on Twitter, I highly suggest it. If you want to keep up with all the political stuff going on with UFOs in terms of legislation, he's the one to follow. Also, Ask a Poll, I believe I'm saying that correctly. Yeah, is just getting incredible quotes from all of our representatives in the United States. Following them around, I love it. I think on your show, you guys said he's chasing people onto like trains and stuff to get them to say stuff. I love it. I love that gumshoe feel that this guy has, and he's getting some good stuff way before the mainstream media is. So, yeah, those two I'm going to recommend.
He is. I just want to kind of give him kudos for this, because the big thing for me that he's done is he has gotten a comment from every single senator, every single one, about UAP, whether it's I'm not following it, or I am following it, or I'm curious, or I'm really entrenched in this. He's asking the question to everyone. So boots on the ground. This is the work that we love.
Absolutely. What are you doing in my front yard? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just no, again, respect where deserved, for sure. All right. Let's do this. Senator Rounds and Schumer submit UAP Disclosure Act as possible amendment to the NDAA. I will run through this quickly. Senator Mike Rounds has introduced a version of the UAP Disclosure Act with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer as lead co-sponsor. Senator Rounds, who is a member of both the Intelligence and Armed Services Committees in the U.S. Senate, on July 11th submitted the UAPDA text as a possible floor amendment to the fiscal year 2025 NDAA. The 2023 version, which was passed in the Senate but later gutted in conference negotiations with the House of Representatives, due mostly to opposition from the Pentagon. The new Rounds Schumer proposal retains controversial provisions providing for the creation of a presidentially appointed Senate-confirmed UAP Records Review Board, a temporary federal agency with broad powers, including subpoena and eminent domain authorities. It also retains definitions for such key operative terms as, quote, non-human intelligence, technologies of unknown origin, UAP, and last but not least, legacy programs. So again, I think a lot of people, Dan, their hearts were broken when this thing did not survive last time. But here we are. They're giving it another try. And not only that, you now have Senator Rounds kind of at the head of it. And we do know that there was a lot of opposition from quote unquote Republicans when it came to this thing, who tend to be a bit more conservative when it comes to where funding goes for certain things, this, that. However, now you have the head person of this amendment in the Republican camp. So I do wonder if that will help. But yeah, what do you make of this new revelation that all of the original text is still there? Like they were like, no, we're not taking anything out. We're still going, I guess, balls to the wall with it, if we're going to use a kind of a crass term. What do you make of this?
Well put. Yeah, it's fascinating. Back when it didn't pass, I said to everyone, don't panic. This happens before, stuff gets taken out, it gets kind of phrased and added back in. And since then, we've heard that, Brandon Fugel of Skinwalker Ranch objected to it through his, representative. And it made a difference. It made a splash. So, there's a direct connection there of, action and using your voice to kind of affect these things. Brandon was concerned that they would find something on Skinwalker Ranch and that the government could just take it off their hands and they'd never see it again. A legitimate concern, I think. We also heard Jack Valet kind of voice similar things at the Sol Foundation. But right now, the text is the same. There's been no kind of changes. But I think what will happen now is, now that it's kind of been submitted, we'll see the haggling begin, and we'll see the text kind of adjust and change, and hopefully those things that people objected to last year will be, lessened, and their concerns will be addressed. And so Brandon Fugel could turn around and say, no, I fully support this now. Go ahead. The review board, I think, is a really important part of it. A completely independent review board that can, advise the president and advise AARO and be essentially the ultimate stop for kind of saying whether something should be in the National Archives for the public to see, or whether it needs to stay classified. And what I love about this is there's a presumption of disclosure. That's the phrase that they've got in there, where before it was presumed that everything to do with UAP would be classified, whereas now everything with this, if it gets passed, everything presumed to do with UAP will be released transparently, which is great. That's a sea change. Whether that has an impact, we'll see. We'll see if it passes. That kind of remained in the language that did pass last year. But the discussion starts now for this. And it's really important at this juncture. We've seen it tabled as an amendment. So if you support it and you want your representatives to support it, now is the time to go to places like uapcaucus.com, or just go to the government website and find your local representatives and speak to them and say, I want you to support this. Use your voices. It makes an impact. And I can't stress that enough. If we want to see this pass, let your representatives know that you want it to pass. And maybe when it comes to the point where someone tries to, rip it apart this year, a bunch more people will stand up for it and say, no, you will not change this. This is going to pass. If you've got nothing to be afraid of, let it pass.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, Dan, that I think is important with this is, like you said, the wording on a lot of these things. The I've always had issues with two parts of this, and it's the eminent domain. I'd love to get your thoughts on that and the legacy program thing. Now, we have people like David Grush, who has come forward and said these legacy programs exist. They've been there. He's spoken to the people who've worked on them. And will we get those names? Will we get those people to come forward through whistleblower protection and whatnot to finally get on the Congress floor and say, yes, these things exist. Go get them. Go get the stuff. And that's where this eminent domain thing comes in too. This is all hypothetical, what I'm saying, guys. I'm not saying this is what I believe is going to happen, or that I'm not getting this is just the way it is in terms of the wording that they've given with all of this. I want to go back to eminent domain. I've always had a big issue with that. What does that mean to you personally when they say eminent domain? And do you think that's a good thing for the government to be in possession of all quote unquote crashed materials? And we're going to get into that in just a little bit and how that this ties into it. Eminent domain. What are your thoughts?
I mean, you've pretty much hit the nail on the head there. Like, do we trust the government to take this and not put it into a black hole where we never see it again, where we never hear about it or anything like that? And I mean, for me, no, I don't trust that they won't do that. So I'd like to see something more robust there. There was a really good proposal from Snake. I want to say Snake Bob or Snake Plissken online.
Pliskin?
Plissken, yeah. And he kind of proposed that instead of eminent domain where the government could just come and take your stuff and you can't do anything about it, a better solution would be kind of a registration program, that if you have it, register it, and if people in the government want to study it, they can come and study it. I think that would be a really good way of kind of getting rid of those concerns. The review board could be the ones to kind of look at that registration list and verify whether these things are anomalous or not. But we've heard from various sources that there are people inside these aerospace companies that want to divest themselves of this anomalous material. They want to give it over for study. So maybe eminent domain is a little too strong arming, and I also worry that these aerospace companies, they're not just American companies, like small companies making planes now like they were back in the 40s. These are international mega companies that just have so much money and so many resources. So what happens if the American government says, okay, we know you have this stuff, we're going to come get it? What happens if it's stored on foreign soil? Like, that's
Right.
illegal, right? For them to just go in and start taking stuff from other countries. So there needs to be a bit more. It sounds like it's just a stick at the moment. There needs to be a carrot with it.
Absolutely. Let's see what our listeners and viewers think, Dan. I did put a poll up over on the
Oh,
YouTube
nice.
video to see what people thought about this. I'm going to head over there and check out what you guys said. My question I asked over there was, will the UAP Disclosure Act ever get passed as it currently stands? So 10% said yes, 41% said no, 47% said in some form, and 2% said the what? So yeah, make of that what you will. I think as it stands right now, it was very courageous to put it in as is, changing nothing. But it could yield unfortunate results moving
Yeah.
forward. So
I'm
yeah,
I'm
we'll
hoping
see.
that we saw it, after it was ripped apart, we saw Schumer kind of take the stand in Congress, in the Senate, and speak about it and say, like, it's a travesty, like one of the biggest travesties in American history that this thing wasn't passed. So I'm hoping that the officials who were there to listen to that, I'm hoping that they remember that they heard him, and that this time around when it comes through, there's going to be a lot more support for it, or a lot more active conversation. This is kind of where I'm thinking that, maybe everyone's mind being on other issues, but due to the election kind of cycle, is a good thing here. Maybe less attention is better. Last year and this year already, we've had people such as Tim Burchett who say that they support the UAP legislation and they support transparency, completely badmouth this really well thought out, really robust legislation, just to kind of maybe get votes or just to muddy the waters. And this is a bipartisan agreement. There's people from both sides of the aisle that are giving the thumbs up, Schumer and Rounds here, Democrats and Republicans alike. So I really hope people like Tim, people like Luna can kind of get off of those high horses and actually support something that will have an impact for decades to come without thinking what it can gain for them.
Which is hard, Dan, because I mean, make no mistake, the only reason a lot of these representatives are even trying to dip their toe into the UAP topic is for votes.
Yeah.
Let's just be completely honest. They don't care
Yeah.
about you or me or the UFO community or transparency on the topic of UFOs. They care about votes. They care about how they're perceived within the national security apparatus and the people above them. And it's sad. It's sad that unfortunately, those are the only people that could actually make change when it comes to this topic within government bureaucracy. And that we have to rely on them to do it. But like you said earlier, like if you really want to make some change, contact your local representatives
Yeah.
and see what they can do on sort of a more grassroots level, even if it's like just get it, like you said, hey, we have all of these, let's say, trucks that go through a town every day. What if we were to put a UAP tracking device on all of them, pay the truck drivers to have it on there,
Yeah.
and like there you go. There's your city planning right there, or your transportation organization could get involved, and like there we go, more data to then try to understand what UAP phenomena is. There we go. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna run for office and get some trackers on all the trucks throughout
Vote
the United
Sprague.
States. Yeah, folks. Oh God, please don't say that. That someone's gonna clip that and use it against me. No, no. Well, Dan, we did talk about UFO materials. Let's get to the other big story that kind of came out, and this came to us from John Greenwald over at the Black Vault. I'm gonna bring up our slideshow here, and controversial one. I know this let down a lot of people, but I think, again, like you mentioned earlier, when we do get answers to things, we have to, we don't have to, but we should accept them when we know that it's verified, peer reviewed, and all of that. But you have some updates on peer review when it comes to this story, so let's get to it.
Yeah.
AARO releases findings on suspected ET alloy. Ooh, that is a heck of a headline. The All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office published 2 reports detailing the analysis of a magnesium alloy specimen that has been the subject of much speculation. The specimen, purportedly recovered from a crashed ET vehicle in 1947, I wonder what they mean by that, has been alleged to exhibit extraordinary properties, including functioning as a terahertz waveguide and generating anti-gravity capabilities. So in 2022, AARO contacted Oak Ridge National Laboratory to conduct a thorough investigation into the specimen's origins and properties. Oak Ridge's investigation involved a series of advanced tests, including isotopic ratio measurements, elemental composition analysis, and structural characterization using microscopy and spectrometry techniques. I hope I said those right.
You did.
Okay, thank you. Phew. This is what I get for reading from a script, guys. I apologize. The findings, as documented in the reports, indicate that the specimen is of terrestrial origin. The findings, the isotopic composition of the magnesium and lead in the specimen falls within the expected values for terrestrial materials, suggesting that it is not extraterrestrial and does not meet the theoretical requirements to function as a terahertz wave guide. Despite the conclusive findings, the reports acknowledge the specimen's long and debated history. While the analysis strongly supports a terrestrial origin, the exact historical origin and purpose of the specimen remain unclear due to its undocumented chain of custody and conflicting personal accounts. The report released by AARO is available. I have it in the show notes below. So if you guys want to read the report in full, you can go do that and look closer at Oak Ridge's analysis. But Dan, I've said enough, man. I wanted to get the sciencey stuff out of the way. What do you make of AARO and Oak Ridge Laboratory, their findings, and this entire story?
So, firstly, I have to point out that Dr. Kirkpatrick took a job with Oak Ridge Labs after he left AARO. So that's a little sus to me that he's kind of going, I agree with myself. But luckily, there is a process that can take place called peer review in science where you put the raw data out there and people can look at it and make their own analysis and see whether it's correct. There was a To the Stars investor meeting earlier this year where they said that this would be coming. They'd be notified the tests were complete and that they'd be provided with the report that we're seeing now that people are able to go read. And they said that when we get that report, we're going to dig into it ourselves and just check that everything's fine, which is, peer review there. However, Kirkpatrick or AARO, they haven't included the raw data there. So people can't really do peer review here. And that's disappointing because Dr. Kirkpatrick has been singing the praises of peer review in the scientific process and asking for people to share the raw data of their sightings and things like that. And yet here he is kind of doing the same thing as he's complaining that other people are doing. But luckily, we've had a few people speak out about this kind of along the way. Back on January 24th, Dr. Gary Nolan of Stanford, people will know him because, he's analyzing UAP materials or purported UAP materials with Jacques Vallée and other people. And he's more than happy to use his spare time and his incredibly cool equipment that can image things down to the molecule so he can see kind of where everything is to look at this stuff. And he was referring to, when he said the following, he was talking about Dr. Kirkpatrick's assertion that this was a missile casing that had been kind of misidentified. Now, the missile casing thing doesn't come up in this paper, which is real strange. You would think that, if they can identify the materials, then they can suggest a source, which hasn't happened. But Gary Nolan back on January 24th said, well, I personally have 2 pieces of this material through 2 chains of evidence. The material is so fragile at this point that it crumbles easily. I've made burnt toast with more resilience. I don't know of any missile casing so fragile that it could have survived transport and loading. Never mind the acceleration of being fired. It would be dust before it left the firing tube. Both of my pieces exhibit extreme layering. So I look forward to Dr. Kirkpatrick's peer review data, as well as all the other claims he has made. Has he released any data from any of the claims? Did I miss something? So Gary right now is probably digging into this paper and lamenting the fact that the raw data isn't available. He would be disappointed. But upon release of this article, Joe Magia on Twitter, that UFO Joe, he fired over a message to Dr. Hal Puthoff from To the Stars and, various other initiatives going all the way back to Project Stargate and remote viewing and things like that. Very experienced guy in this field. And he said this is a lengthy one, so I'm going to take a big breath and just try and...
You got it.
So he said, our preliminary assessment of the ORNL analysis report. 1. Oak Ridge National Labs concludes that the isotopic ratios match those of terrestrial materials. Therefore, it appears likely that manufacture of the sample was terrestrially based. This appears correct. However, based on my ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, which is the idea, this is just an aside, which is the idea that there is a species here that shares this planet with us, based on my ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, this might not necessarily indicate a purely mundane sourcing from terrestrial manufacture. So if there is another species and they've made this, then it's still something anomalous, but it's of Earth. So, it's a little wishy-washy to just say, it's terrestrial, therefore it's not important.
Right.
Number 2, the randomized nanocrystalline structure of the bismuth layers, as opposed to the pure crystalline layer, argues against their use as a reduced-size terahertz waveguide medium, as discussed in the literature by Batolsky et al. This appears to be a reasonable interpretive conclusion from their examination. However, as part of our follow-up inquiry, we should ask if the randomized nanocrystalline structure of the bismuth layers might be the result of a crash-induced randomization of initially crystalline layers. Basically, Hal's saying it could have been damaged. If this was a craft that crashed, this material could have been damaged, and it could well be a terahertz waveguide, but it doesn't function anymore because it's broken, because it crashed. I think that's a fair assertion, and you've got to kind of check. They did mention in the report that it had been subject to weathering, so maybe the weathering's kind of reduced one of those layers, and but there's a tantalizing clue in there that if, maybe someone can do research to figure out if you can even make a terahertz waveguide with layered bismuth. We're starting to get to the place where we could make that. Number 3, unaddressed in the paper was the now well-established difficulty in bonding bismuth and magnesium layers together. This raises the possibility of advanced manufacturing of the sample despite the mundane component distribution. Based on the subtleties of points raised above, there remain topics worthy of some further discussion. Basically, he's saying that, yeah, okay, you can make this material, but it's really difficult to make it now. So what the hell is it doing in the 40s? This makes no sense.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's such an advanced manufacturing technique that it's just confusing that it's in the 40s. So think that they'd want to dig into that.
Yes, Dan. And I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
Well, there's that new show that Chrissy Newton and Mitch Horowitz are doing where they studied materials from the supposed Roswell crash site as well.
Yes.
And they had tests done at a different lab and on similar materials. I don't know if they're at all related, but in terms of the anomalous things that they found with these alloys, they discovered a 100% pure aluminum in the materials that they had tested, which again is insane. That's stuff that you don't see unless it's being made today at the top aerospace level. What was it doing 5 feet under the ground due to weathering and erosion and just decades and decades of sand out there in the desert? What was it doing 5 feet under the ground, allegedly where it was found? So that does always really astound me. Not that it's quote unquote extraterrestrial, but what was this highly advanced debris doing back there in 1947?
And we have to answer that question if we want to say that this is just a human-made thing. Maybe it's an accidental off-run of some industrial process or something, but we've got to figure that out. Otherwise, it's a question mark. And that's currently where we are with this paper asserting it's nothing, but then saying a bunch of things that raise more questions and they're just not addressing. And this, I think, is why people have just lost faith in AARO, because they seem happy to just take their first answer and then just put it to the side when there are tantalizing questions that they could be addressing, and in addressing them, they would get more respect. They would get a better reputation for talking openly about these things. And you know what? It's okay to say, I don't know. And they seem so insecure about saying that.
Yeah, they're afraid to. I know, man. I did interrupt. Did you have more that you wanted to share there for Put Off?
No, that was let me just see. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that was it.
that
Basically,
was it.
you
Oh,
know, his
okay.
last point was about the bonding of the layers and so on and so forth. And terahertz are a really interesting thing. So I'll just kind of throw this in. You know,
Yeah.
the electromagnetic spectrum, terahertz are a very specific part of it. And to be able to generate them takes an enormous amount of power that we struggle to be able to do. So you've got to wonder, you know, if there's any clue that this stuff is used in that way, it's not us that's doing it.
Hmm. Interesting. Now, there's sort of a, I guess, an addendum to this entire thing too, Dan. Going back to the stars. Now, a lot of people in the last few years, myself included, have been like, "What the hell happened with Crata?" Like, WTF, guys? Like, that was such a big deal. We were like, "No, you're giving this stuff to the army? Like, what are you thinking? No, 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 no. We want it out of military hands." But now we did get an update on this, apparently. Do you want to update us on the Crata agreement and what that might have to do with this story?
Yeah, so the Crowder agreement was basically that they would give this, you know, the piece that Tom DeLonge supposedly bought from Linda Moulton Howe over to the army for testing, and that is this piece. So this is essentially the Crowder complete. This
Got it.
is the results there. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I was worried that it was just going to go into the black hole and we'd never see it again. But luckily, it's been heartening to hear. You know, Gary Nolan has a couple of pieces. Linda Moulton Howe didn't sell everything. A couple of other people have pieces. So this stuff is distributed really well to the point where, you know, no man in black is going to show up and just steal the whole thing in one go. There's so many places. It reminds me there was a UFO crash in the Bowen Mountains in the UK, like way back when. They call it the Welsh Roswell, and the guy had a visit from some men in black, and they were kind of saying we want the material back. So his action was to cut the material up, put it in keychains, and sell it at a UFO convention. So this material is out there, and it's in these little kind of key rings that say, you know, the Welsh Roswell. If anyone has one, let me know. Like your price, I would love to own one as a Welsh person.
If you're
But that's
starting to
the way, right?
grow, if you're starting to grow extra limbs, you're gonna know why, guys. You're
Yes.
wearing a piece of a UFO. Yeah.
And that's been asserted to just be, you know, plain old aerospace material. But it's never really been tested or anything like that. So you know, the way to do all of this research is to open source it, to spread it far and wide so that whoever wants to keep this pushed under the rug does not get a chance to do that.
Right. Exactly. And what's most important too, man, I think, is something Frank Kimbler brings up all the time. And I love this, is we need at least 3 labs to come up with the same conclusion. If we're
Yes.
just getting the Oak Ridge results, like, all right, step one, now let's go to these other labs and see if we can get the same results. Then I will be like, okay, Arrow, thank you.
Yes,
Thank you for doing your
exactly.
due diligence. Thank you for giving us an explanation. Let's move the F on from
And
these arts parts, as it were.
Spurs, yeah, and we're kind of seeing like a similar process take place with the Nazca mummies, right? We've seen a
Mm,
few papers produced, and there are calls for other labs to confirm them with, you know, various arguments in the mix. But the point is, the more people look at these and get results, the better. We want all of these separate data sources for these things so that we can contrast and compare them. Dr. Gary Nolan. Spoke about an initiative that he wanted to do at Stanford at the Sol Foundation, where he called it the Stardust Repository, which would be a data store for all the analysis, all the raw data of any anomalous kind of materials that he came across, so other labs could do that work and look at them. And I'd love to see, you know, we haven't had an update on that. So if you interview Gary soon, ask him. I'd love to hear how that's going, because that's the
interesting.
kind of stuff that's going to move this conversation forward. Because, you know, really at the end of the day, it's not me or you who are going to be able to study this stuff and have the authority to say XYZ on it. We need to defer to experts. So the more experts put their opinions in the pool, the better informed we are going to be. And I just wanted to, you know, before we move on, that Roswell piece that you mentioned, that was stolen from a museum.
I
And
heard what
it
happened
could
with
be
that. Yeah,
they put it in the museum and they went back and it had been stolen.
someone
And,
broke
you
in or
know,
something.
I think it was during the day that it
Okay.
was removed from the display and just it's gone. And tantalizing again, is it someone covering it up, or is it just a UFO fan that's gone, oh, I kind of want to keep this, you know, and taking
Yeah.
it? Either way, unacceptable. Like, we need this stuff out there in the public sphere to be studied and identified and discussed.
Right. Well, guys, Dan and I both have alibis. We were not in Roswell 2 weeks ago when that was stolen. Just so you know, that's so sad. I hope they're able to recover that.
Yeah.
Crazy. I think that's all I have here in terms of news stories, Dan. But I do have some podcast highlights. Are you willing to stick around for a few of those?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. I haven't shared these with you, but I would like to get kind of your gut reaction
Sure.
to a few of these. And the first one actually comes from a podcast I just became familiar with. It's called the Behind Greatness podcast, and quite a few people have been on it recently. Michael Masters, who I'm going to play a clip about. But the first guest that they had that I found was Shanaz Sinai, who is an aerospace engineer for NASA and is currently working on the first ever human landing system. So, in this clip I'm going to show, she talks about why UAP are often seen surveilling launch events at both NASA and SpaceX. This is pretty cool. So, I'm going to go ahead and play this, and then we'll talk a little bit about it on the other side, if that's cool.
Interesting, because like people say that, of course, when we decide to launch a rocket, we're always looking at the weather and looking at a whole bunch of different variables that can interfere with the launch of the rocket. And of course, even then we scrap so many launches, right? So it's pretty obvious that you can't plan for it to the point where it can always go right. There are lots of variables in the equation. But one thing that I've also noticed is that there are times that in the morning of the launch of the rocket, they say that the weather is not looking good, and therefore we probably will have to scrub it. And then in 3 hours, everything changes, and then they're able to launch it. So I've seen it both ways, right? I've seen it reverse in both ways. And I have had engineers come to me and say that they were seeing crafts right at the launch site that moved in ways that nothing can move, at least nothing that is designed by human can move with the speed that it was moving. Or there were certain motion that they were doing that the craft is not capable of doing. So I had people actually come to me and say those things. So the point of the story is that we have data that shows that there is an intervention. We have a data that shows that not only that that there's an intervention that's invisible, but there's intervention that's visible. Like there are crafts like lurking around right at the launch site when these things are happening. There are times we have launched when we are testing to kind of make sure that we can do certain things, and things happen that's just completely unexplainable, when we were doing the missile testing for the target. So my philosophy is based on years and years of hearing these type of story, is that because I do believe that everything happens for a reason, and everything that happens has also a reason. You see, there's two different distinction there. So it's all about, making sense out of these information. And I say that the reason when we do, like when we blasted the atomic bomb, right? When we do launch a rocket, whenever we do anything that is going to take us into that projectile motion, we are interfering we're interfering at the larger level, right? I mean, every single action that as a human we take, we are interfering with someone, right? But when you're doing something as big as rocket launches, then you are interfering with all there is in existence at the larger level. So there are beings, definitely I've always believed that there has been intelligence other than human, right? There's intelligence in different form and in different dimension and in different places. This intelligence has its way of showing up in your life depending on what they're going to get from it. So whenever we do something as big as rocket launches, then we are interfering with these intelligence at the level where it changes the shape of humanity, the shape of our history and our future, and also their future.
Whoops. There we go. Unmuted us. Well, okay. So I don't even know where to begin, man. Like, again, this is a NASA aerospace engineer who's in charge of the launches for both SpaceX and NASA, saying these things that UFOs have been seen around launch sites, that they are quote unquote invisible at times, and that she personally believes that, yeah, they're kind of keeping an eye on this. So, yeah, what are your sort of initial reactions to these admissions that she made.
Well, I mean, what a clip. You know, that's an expert, that's someone experienced, that's someone in a high level with a high level of responsibility saying that they see these things. You know, we have to listen to that. And it makes me wonder, you know, are they watching our progress? You know, are they fascinated with us just as we would be watching someone else kind of make a space program on another planet and maybe get to a point where they can go to the stars and say hello to us? We've heard before that UAP are kind of attracted by nuclear technology and various advanced technologies. And this is no exception here, right? Like watching the SpaceX rockets land and things like that. This is the cusp of innovation on this planet. And it makes me think of the Prime Directive in Star Trek. You know, they're allowed to show up, they're allowed to watch, but they're not allowed to share the technology and to, you know, impart wisdom that this kind of species wouldn't have. But, you know, in terms of watching us develop from, you know, amoeba all the way up to where we are now, you know, launching rockets, I think it's like 100 years of flight. We've gone from not being able to fly at all to being able to be up there with the birds, to pushing into the stars and the cosmos, and really, you know, taking our first steps as a species to become a properly universe kind of traveling, expanding species. So to me, it's not surprising that they would show up to kind of watch those things. But it is surprising that we have experts telling us that they're seeing these invisible things and these craft kind of making motions that they don't understand, and that we have data. You know, we have data on this. This is the stuff that AARO should be incorporating into their looking at data instead of focusing just on military sites, which is, you know, it's bias. Where we see that map of we see the map that AARO produced that says these are the hotspots and they're all by military bases because they're only looking at military sensors. We are not going to get a good picture of how often these things appear, where they appear, what they might be doing without taking in all of the data. She mentioned something then that was really interesting, where she said, essentially, we can know what is happening without understanding why. You know, people tend to impart their own kind of point of view on why things happen. But this is where we're at. We know there's something else here, but we don't know the why. And this is why it's kind of treated as a potential threat, because we don't know if it's a threat. So we kind of have to explore all possibilities. There was, I don't know if you watch any, you know, channel, as I find it really interesting. And Bashar was asked about the Tic Tac encounter. And he was asked, why? Why did that happen? Why are they here? Why did they show themselves? And he asserted that it was just to say, look at us, we're here. Here we are. You're not on your own.
Yeah.
And just that little nugget of appearance has created all of this UAP legislation wave, Project Galileo, all these citizen science projects, so on and so forth. So you got to wonder, you know, and I know we're going to talk about Michael Masters in a sec. His idea was that, you know, it might be us from the future kind of coming back. Maybe they're injecting all of these stories at specific points to guarantee a specific future. And I look at the kids in the aerial encounters, for example, they're growing up and speaking out. And that came just at the right time, so that as that story matured, we were able to spread it globally through, you know, the age of communication and through the satellites that we have. Really opportune moment to kind of win over hearts and minds, right? And as you know, for us, we look at the James Webb Telescope and we're like, whoa, that's so much more impressive than what we used to have. My nephew doesn't know what we used to have. That's normal to him. That's the baseline. So as we expand kind of our capabilities of understanding and exploring and so on and so forth, there's going to come a day where the advancement to him blows his mind, and he'll have kids that have this new normal in their lives. And isn't that what this is all about, is to kind of establish that new normal of we are not alone in the universe, and to understand that there are things around us that we affect through, you know, ecosystems, and really appreciate those and really work to be gardeners instead of just consuming resources. It's interesting how most people, and I can't say all because I've not spoken to all, but most people have encounters become really altruistic and become globally minded and universally minded. And I think that's really beautiful. And it's something that we should be listening to.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, man. And spoken like a true European, be gardeners. I love that. I love that. I love it. All right. You mentioned Michael Masters. Let's get to I'm going to say probably the most controversial clip of the night. This one really threw me for a curve, man. I'm going to be completely honest. I don't know what to make of it. Sort of coming off the heels of Michael Masters being a part of the Harvard paper that came out on the quote unquote crypto terrestrials and are aliens walking among us? This big story that made a splash last month. Michael Masters has now, and I know he has also in the past, gone on record in saying that he might have been visited by some sort of intelligence that told him something. So I'm going to go ahead and play this clip again. This is from the Behind Greatness podcast, where Dr. Michael Masters did consider quitting the UFO topic, and he told no one about it, but was asked not to quit during a telepathic intervention by the others. Let's listen to the clip, and we'll talk about this on the other side. This is a doozy.
I was just really burnt out, decided I was going to quit this particular area of research to focus on some other things. Just had that thought in my head. And then I was taken by an individual at a conference about 2 weeks after that, probably, up into an empty room at the conference hotel, who brought another person in, a man who the two knew each other, but they'd never met before face to face. But he comes into the room and then pulls a chair up really, really close to me. So his face is probably like 10 inches from mine, and looks at me in the eyes and calmed me down at first because I was kind of pissed about how close he was sitting. But then these others, as I've come to know them, said through him, we know you've been thinking about quitting lately, and we'd really prefer you didn't do that. And it blew my mind wide open because I hadn't told anybody that. It was just a thought in my head that I'd had about 2 weeks before. And yeah, it from that point on, there was a lot of other things that took place. And eventually, as I've said before in a couple different places, eventually and slowly, to the point where I hardly even noticed it, the entire conversation turned completely telepathic. So we weren't using our voices anymore, but I could still hear their voices, this woman and this man. And it wasn't them talking to me. They were being used as like a vessel of sorts. What I've come to understand is a form of trance mediumship. But they were brought to this place. They brought me up to this place and then had an intervention of sorts. They politely asked me if I would continue doing this for a while. They eventually told me they wanted to put 3 bits of information in my brain that would be important for some future events. Very politely asked me if I consented to that, explained exactly how it would happen, and then it happened exactly how they said it would. Just kind of blacked my eyes out and then force fed all of this information in the form of sort of colorful light into my brain, and also told me I wouldn't have access to it, asked me if that was okay as well, and I agreed to that. And that's been the case. I have no idea what it is. I can't access it, don't really want to access it because I don't want to know the future, especially because I get the sense that there's something coming. A lot of people who have experiences similar to this, and since I've started talking about this recently, so many people have reached out to me and described very, very similar things that have happened to them. And a lot of them have that same sense too, that it's in preparation for something. I don't claim to have any prophetic knowledge. In fact, I'm telling the opposite. I have no idea what it is they put in my brain, but I do get the sense that there's some reason, which is largely why there was an intervention in the first place, perhaps.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay. I don't even know where to begin, man. Dan, what are your thoughts?
Sure. So I know Michael personally. I'm very lucky to know him. He's a great guy, very professional, has produced, peer-reviewed papers and stuff like that, very on the up and up. He was shaken by this. And when he relayed it to me, I can say with 100% certainty that every time I've heard him tell this story again on podcasts, not a single thing changes. Nothing is embellished. Nothing gets deeper. You know, he's clearly affected by this.
Yeah.
But he's so normal in how he talks about it. It's like, you know, he talks about it like putting food out for the dogs kind of thing. It's just
Right.
like, yeah, this happened. I don't know how to incorporate this, but I'm just telling you guys. Yeah, consistent story. And he's had varying reactions to it. Going from, you know, people just being angry at him for expressing it, but also colleagues seem really nonplussed about it. They seem fine with him talking about it, and so, you know, power to Michael for speaking out. And I love that he's setting the example of just saying we need to talk about this stuff as it happens, even if you think it's crazy. This is just something that happens, so we need to look at it. It's a challenging one, right? And it touches on the idea of ontological shock, where when you hear something that is so far outside your wheelhouse and so far outside anything we know, that the initial reaction that you have is to just deny it. And for everyone that's kind of experiencing that right now, just, you know, you don't have to believe Michael. You don't have to say it's not true. You can just sit with it and think about what it would mean if it's true and what it means for you. We've heard about vessels and channelers, and I find it really interesting that he mentioned that, you know, and I totally forgot because I just mentioned Bashar, and that was an accident, you know.
Or was it?
Yeah, or was it? There are no coincidences, but
No.
I recommend you know, if anyone is psi curious, that they go and kind of try out what's called the Estes method, where you wear a pair of headphones that, you know, block what you can hear from the room. You wear a blindfold, so there's absolutely no input, and the person wearing those things listens to cycling radio channels. So it's just gibberish that kind of you're listening to. And like I say, I've done this, so, you know, I can speak from experience. And what the people in the room who don't have their, you know, eyes and ears covered do is they just talk to you like a normal conversation. And your job is you can't hear those people, and that you can't hear, you know, to respond in sensible ways. Your job is to just pick up words from the cycling radio and say them out loud. And if it's successful, that it all kind of lines up as a conversation. My experience listening back to the audio from it was a free-flowing conversation with jokes and everything as it was happening. So to hear Michael touch on that channeling thing around the time as I was experiencing that is just fascinating. And I would suggest people go try it, because it sounds like nonsense, but it works so much more effectively than you would think it would work, just listening to gibberish and saying random bits out loud. The 3 bits of info is interesting because that reminds me of like Fatima and the prophecies that, you know,
That Trinity thing.
children was given. Yeah. And I'm curious to see when they come to the fore for him to say, this is a bit of information that I didn't have before. He mentions colorful light, which again is interesting based on what I said earlier about the sound and frequency and light being frequency. So perfect in terms of communicating. You know, if I show you the color blue, you're going to associate it with certain things in your head. So it's a really effective way of, you know, if we could all just communicate by stream of consciousness and colors, then people would argue a lot less, I think. But the fact that he has no access to it until it's needed, I've heard of that before. And I was racking my brain trying to think of where I've heard of that. Betty and Barney Hill. If you, this kind of happened around there. And there's a movie being developed by Obama's production company called White Mountains.
Right.
That tracks that story. And a big part of that is that Barney is given information that he doesn't know he has until he's in front of the president. And then he's able to say something. And he refers to that as a portal, which is really interesting. But this whole thing kind of brings up the idea of red lines in the subject, right? Everything's so outlandish in the subject that where do you draw the line? And for different people, it's going to be different things. So I was going to ask you, what's your red line? Like, where did you get to where you're like, oh, I can't entertain that. There's just something in me that just won't let me.
Right. So I should preface this. My initial reaction after we played that video was, Dan, take it. I can't even with this. I don't want that to be taken the wrong way, because that's not what I meant. Or I hope that's not how it was perceived. I do firmly believe that Michael believes this happened to him. And you mentioned channeling, you mentioned Estes. On the ghost show I'm doing right now. Basically, when we go into a quote unquote haunted location and nothing's really happening, I've sort of coined my own self proclaimed mantra of when in doubt, Estes it out. And we will.
I love that.
We will pull out the Estes method. I've done it at least, God, 20, 30 times at this point. And dude, like, I cannot deny that the results are often startling.
It
And
works,
again,
right?
it
Or it
works.
seems to.
It seems to work. I want to be very careful because it is all about how you perceive
Yes.
what is happening. But I will say this, there were times when I went under in the quote unquote Estes method where I felt outside of myself. I felt that someone else was channeling. I've never used that word in my life in terms of something I've personally experienced. Something was channeling through me. I was not me talking. Someone was either using me as a vessel or I was communicating with something through the Estes method. So again, where that red line is, I know this is kind of a cop-out answer, but it changes all the time. And that has a lot to do with, before I started doing this ghost show, I might have said what Michael Master said is, oh, come on, man. Like, what are we going back to like the contactee movement? And we're channeling people from Venus and all that. But I also don't want to make light of that because
Sure.
this seems to really affect him. It's very intriguing that he was given the information, but he doesn't know what it is. And he does stress that point, which I think is important. He's not out here proclaiming a message. He literally says, I don't know what they told me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I ever will. They said like someday I might, but I don't know. I don't know. So I do respect that, and his matter of fact nature to all of it too, like you mentioned, just like he's just saying like, oh yeah, I went to the store, I bought some groceries and I went home. No, I went in this room and I channeled something and they told me not to quit ufology. Like it sounds ridiculous if you were to just hear this out of context, but when you know Michael, when you know the work he's doing and the possible connections that could be made with the theories he's brought forward and what he's saying he experienced, man, it kind of gives me chills to think about that.
Yeah.
So for me, honestly, like the red line changes all the time. And if there's anything I've learned with this topic, it's never like, don't limit yourself.
Yeah.
Like, obviously be objective. Like, God, we need that so desperately in this field. But that goalpost changes, man, for me every single day, especially since I started doing more paranormal, I guess, or quote unquote supernatural approaches to these things. So yeah, how about you?
I would say the same thing. Like I'm to a point now where if I find something in my gut says that's nonsense, that I identify that as I'm feeling challenged, and therefore I need to sit on this and think about it more and process it a bit more instead of just going, no, it's not true because I can't handle it.
Yeah.
Initially that might have been the more of the, the paranormal stuff, but I've been reading this kind of stuff since I was a kid and I'm fascinated by it all, but I used to see it as separate stuff. And then I came across work by, people such as John Keel, who he kind of, if people go read the Mothman Prophecies book, I highly recommend it. Really fascinating because it draws a line between like synchronicity, mediumship, and UFOs. And John essentially would set up people experiences shortly after, seeing a UFO would start getting strange phone calls with like robotic voices and things like that. And they would share information and tell the person to tell John Keel this information. And he found that they were predicting world events and they weren't always spot on. They were sometimes a few days off or they get a couple of details wrong, but they were warning and trying to show like, hey, we're outside of time. And there's that famous phrase, what is your time cycle, that these others seem to always say, suggesting that they don't experience time like we do. But what I wanted to stress was that through those calls, John would kind of test it and he'd test his theories and so on and so forth. And he found that the different sources, so like if someone said I was a UFO experiencer or someone said I'm a medium that channels the dead, they would have the same information for him. And it was at this point that he was like, this is all the same stuff. I don't know what it is anymore. I can't say that it's ghosts. I can't say that it's UFOs. It's just something other that we clearly have to listen to. And it gets really weird as well. You know, with him, there's a certain point where he gets a warning about the bridge collapse in Point Pleasant. You know, the Mothman Prophecies kind of culminates in, and he decides he doesn't want to be around, so he leaves town. And he just picks a hotel at random. And he goes into this hotel at random, found as he's driving along the road, and there are a bunch of messages waiting for him, like mysterious, weird messages. And like they were visits he had to his hometown that before he'd even decided to go home, his friends were saying, "Hey, someone just told me you're coming home in a week. Is that true?" And it's like, what is happening? It's so much weirder and so much broader than people that are just into UFOs will allow for, you know? And like I said, if you feel challenged by something, really drill in and ask yourself why you feel challenged by it, and just dig into it and do a little research and see if you can't figure that out.
I love that. I love that. Well, I'm wishing Michael the best with his digging, and I hope, you know, maybe he can find some solace in not knowing those answers and living in the mystery for now, and then maybe one day he will get them.
Yeah.
Either for him or for all of us. So
And I'm
yeah.
sure he'll tell us if it pops
Yeah.
up and he's like, "Oh yeah, this was the thing." He'll tell us.
Yeah, and he'll say it like we said, just like just any other day. Like
Yep.
it was just he was relaying what day it was of the week. Yeah. I love it. I love it. All right. Dan, we have one more clip. I've kept you way longer than I anticipated, man. Are you willing to stick around for this last clip?
Absolutely. Everything's timey-wimey. This feels like I've been with
Timey-wimey.
you for 10 minutes. It's
I
been an
know,
hour
right?
40. Let's crack on.
That's because we're in the warp bubble, baby. All right, let's get to our last clip. Speaking of warp bubbles, I guess, kind of, sort of. We're moving to Avi Loeb. So he recently was on News Nation talking about a lot of different things. You know, they asked him about the Harvard paper that came out. They asked him all about AARO and their report. But the clip we're going to show has to do with, you know, where the Galileo project is at right now, and kind of going back to the spherals that he discovered in the ocean off of Papua New Guinea. So I'm going to go ahead and play that clip, and we'll start to close things out after that. Give this a watch, guys.
Project that I'm leading operates already one observatory watching the entire sky 24/7 looking for unusual objects. We're building 2 additional observatories. All 3 of them will operate in tandem within the coming year. We have looked at 500,000 objects so far. We haven't seen anything anomalous, but we are searching. And you know, the advice you give to anyone that feels lonely, anyone that claims, "Where is everybody?" like Enrico Fermi asked, is, you know, you should be proactive. You should search for a partner. You are not that attractive that everyone will come to you. You have to search for them. And that's the approach that we are taking within the Galileo project. And hopefully within a year or 2, we will have something.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Looking for the hard data to answer such a romantic question. What is your response to the Pentagon's March report saying that there is no evidence of UFOs and that people simply misinterpreted what they heard or saw?
Well, I think they argue that 97% of the events that they looked into from the past can be explained. But it's really about the 1 out of a million events, because we know there is a lot of things going in the sky that are human-made or natural. And, you know, they're unable to visit past events and figure out what happened. So I think, you know, it's one way for them to basically argue that, you know, they're doing their job for national security purposes. That's their day job. My day job as a scientist is to figure out what lies outside the solar system. And that's not part of national security. It's part of science.
Understood. And I do want to ask the latest in your research. I know you recovered these small magnetic spherules from the Pacific Ocean, and you believe they came from a watermelon-sized object that collided with Earth in 2014, potentially a piece of alien-built technology. There have been critics saying this is coal ash. You are testing it. What are you finding now?
We found that it's definitely not coal ash based on 55 elements from the periodic table that we compared to the composition of coal ash. We also figured that the composition is different from solar system materials. So it's very likely that we found material from outside the solar system, but we didn't find big pieces as of yet. The material we found was tiny droplets, less than a millimeter in size. And so we hope to go again to the same site, this time with a robot that we will put on the ocean floor, a remotely operated vehicle that will give us a video feed. And if we do find bigger pieces, and by the way, that mission will cost us $6.5 million. We are seeking a potential funder for that mission as of now. Then, we could tell easily whether it was natural, a rock, or some artificial gadget. If we find the core of it, it may have buttons on it. And the question would be, should we press a button?
Should we press that button? That one always gets me, Dan. That hypothetical.
Three-body problem, right?
Yeah, exactly, man. Oh, I still haven't seen that, by the way. I really got to get on that. Both versions. Yeah, I know. I
would
started the
recommend
first
go
book.
straight to the book. Yeah.
Okay.
You'll like the
I
book.
did make my way halfway through the first book, so I'll continue with that first. I guess, okay, let's start with the clip. He gave his thoughts on what, the government's doing versus what he's doing as a scientist. Great. Galileo project. I didn't know this. They're building 3 observatories. That's crazy to me. Like, I can't even imagine building one to look for these things. And they've already looked at 500,000 objects. That's just, those numbers are like just insurmountable to me. So yeah, what did you make of this clip with Avi, and what are your hopes moving forward with these, I guess, spherules that they found on the ocean floor? Wherever you want to start with that.
Yeah, so I mean, I love what Avi's doing. He is letting his curiosity lead his work, and I think that's exactly how scientists should be. Being curious is so important. If we weren't curious, we never would have looked in, for any answers whatsoever. So I appreciate that he's trying to inspire, and he's setting a really good example, saying we can do this work. My hope going forward is that, the accusation that this stuff was coal ash was from somebody who hadn't even read Avi's paper. So I'm really hoping going forward that people start looking at the results and working in good faith with these efforts. Instead of just fooling them, like, work with Avi. He'd be happy to say this is nothing if it's nothing. He is famously against using like new physics and warp physics and things like that to explain things until he sees it. So he's kind of, if you had a scale of 1 to 10 from believer to skeptic, I'd put him, as a centrist, around 4 or 5 there, who's happy to entertain, but will let the evidence lead the work and the conclusions. His example of, being proactive is great, because essentially, if you're in a house and you don't look out the window, you're never going to know you have neighbors. And you will assert that you don't have them until you look. So you have to look. And if there's nothing there, fine. But you're going to look, right? Reminds me of, just to link it to something we discussed earlier, of whale song, that the first word that they'd kind of deciphered using AI was a call that essentially says, I am, or I am here. And that is whales announcing into the darkness their presence and waiting to hear back if they're alone in their universe. And they never are. There's a clue there, right? And it's really touching. I even got that, tattooed there. That's a representation of that sound.
Wow.
And it's beautiful, right?
It
and
is.
Is that not just life and what we're all doing? But yeah, Avi's going back out, carry on the work. That's what we want to see. I might be working a little bit with them as well going forward on something that you'll hear about, when it happens. But 6.5 million, right? That's really expensive, and he'll get the funding. And this is his time, money, and energy into answering a question that we'll want answered. I always see people go hard at him, whether they're from, the UFO community or the scientific community. And I would just say, stand back and let him do his work. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. If it's crap work, sunlight will show that. If it's good work, sunlight will show that. What are we afraid of? Let's open this to science and really get in there. And Avi is leading the charge in that area, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. And again, if he diaries this entire expedition like he did last time, dude, I like woke up every morning with my coffee and read these diary entries like it was freaking Hemingway.
It's
Like
great,
it
right?
was so fun to like follow the expedition and see the passion and the
Hmm.
curiosity and the romanticism, as he would say, in what he's doing and trying to do this as a scientist and go against a lot of the mainstream scientific community and truly ask that question: Are we alone or not? So yeah, all the power to him. I can't wait to see what another expedition will uncover, if anything. And yeah, I can't wait to hear how you might possibly be involved. So stay tuned for that, guys. That's pretty cool.
I'm so tempted
Austin.
to say something, but I can't. I'll
Oh
ruin
God.
it.
I'm not gonna. A part of me, the content creator, wants to be like, "Come on, Dan, tease it." But as a person, trust me, I know what that "stay tuned" thing can do. So,
Yeah, I don't want to say like hashtag soon. I don't want to be
yeah,
doing
yeah,
that.
yeah. Let's not. Let's not. We'll leave it for curious minds to ponder. That's for sure. Speaking of curious minds to ponder, Dan, I want you to be with me for this official announcement here on Somewhere in the Live Stream of Anomicon 2
And
2024.
the crowd goes wild.
Are they? I hope. I hope,
I can
man.
hear him.
A huge shout out to Polaris Castillo, who came up with this gorgeous logo
It's great.
for what will be on September 1st and 2nd. Anomicon 2 is coming to you with a whole slew of new speakers, including Dan, who will be speaking and doing his own presentation this year. I know I had you talking about Colombia with our good friend Vinny last
Mhm.
year. But yeah, I'm looking forward to what you bring to Anomicon 2. And we have some really interesting, new, diverse voices that are going to be joining us for Anomicon 2. Everything from cryptids to tarot to witchcraft to UFOs to ultra terrestrials, crypto terrestrials, everything in between. So, dude, I'm so excited. Again, that's going to be September 1st and 2nd. Suzanne did put a link for our website where you can see some of our speakers right now that I have announced and the topics they'll be talking about. That's at anomicon.com. So yeah, that's all I got in terms of what I'm up to, Dan. But I want to know, what are you up to, and where can everyone find everything that you are up to?
Yeah,
You're
for
always doing
sure.
something.
Yeah, I'm terrible. I have so many things on, and things get left by the wayside and stuff. I give a little tease. My talk at Anomicon is going to be called Invisible Empires. Take from that what you will. If you've enjoyed my conversation here, you'll probably dig it. So, in terms of what I am up to, you'll see me over at That UFO Podcast with Andy on the breakdowns and things like that. Me and my partner also just bought an RV, so we're going to be kitting that out with some UAP tracking stuff. And as we travel around, I'm going to be starting to kind of build out my own kind of podcast and YouTube channel. I have the privilege of knowing a lot of really, really cool people. Michael Masters, Lou Elizondo, Sean Cahill, Alex Dietrich, the kids of the people that were involved in the Hopkinsville gobbling kind of case. So many that I've just been really fortunate to, serendipitously meet and grow really great relationships with. So I'm going to be trying to bring them out to the RV and have a little bit of a talk. And who knows, maybe I'll even do a little RV in the RV, remote viewing and things like that. But that's all going to be about following curiosity, about inspiring those kind of, movements and people to kind of act in those ways and to not be fearful when they approach these things. It's just unknown. As Lou Elizondo said, at the edge of the map, it used to be written, there'd be monsters here. Now we know it's just giant squid, and it's kind of a lot more boring than we thought. As well as that, you're going to be seeing a project rollout soon from something called Nano, which is a whole kind of spectrum paranormal, supernatural tracking app. So you'll be able to, go on there and see the sightings other people are having, see their evidence, help debate whether it's real or not, maybe even go into the field and kind of help answer some more questions. That'll be rolling out soon. There'll be a kind of media piece around that with some documentaries and podcasts and things like that rolling out. So we're all working real hard on making that just great. The idea is it's made by the community for the community. It will be completely transparent. No kind of taking your rights of data that you upload and things like that, like some other companies that I'll mention. And you will know all of our investors and you'll know all the people involved and so on and so forth. So I'm really hoping that it will be a big success and supported by the community. You'll see, along with Olaf Rockner, incredible UFO artist, we worked together under the banner of 33 Ounce Creative. We made Michael Masters' latest book cover. We do them for Graham Rendell. And we always produce these like UFO images that are based on old World War II plain oil paintings that my grandpa used to have on his wall that I just fell in love with. So we kind of try and keep it serious and you know, put these little intriguing things in. So hopefully one a month you'll kind of see more sightings celebrated along with anniversaries. Yeah, I think that's everything for now. There's so much. I'm definitely forgetting something, but yeah, just follow me at The Signal. You'll see everything that I'm doing, including, you know, totally humbled to see Tom DeLonge wearing my t-shirt designs whilst playing a Blink-182 show, my favorite band. So that just meant so much to me. So yeah, go get a tea. Spread the word. Tom was right. Aliens exist.
Tom was right, man. I love it. I love it. Dan, I have to thank you, brother, for taking 2 hours out of your Sunday to join us here at Somewhere in the Live Stream. This is probably our longest live stream we've done, but I knew I know, right? Yeah, we broke the record for the Redux version at least. And yeah, we covered a lot. So the future looks bright. Again, like I know there's a lot of unrest going on in the US right now. Politically, it will be like that for the next few months, if not years, if not decades, if not centuries. However, UFOs are here. And we're going to continue to talk about them, whether people like it or not. And Dan, you're one of my favorite people to talk UFOs with, buddy.
Me too.
So, yeah, I'm going to say goodnight to you, and I will close it out with the audience as well. So, guys, thank you. A special thank you to Suzanne, as always, for moderating, doing an incredible job. To all of our regulars, thank you, guys. Thank you for being here, for your questions, your comments. I saw you guys having a wonderful conversation in there in the chat. So yeah, I'm going to leave it once again with our mantra here, and that is to keep your feet on the ground but never stop searching somewhere in the skies. Have a great night, guys, and we'll see you next week. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
There's nothing to hide. There's nothing to hide at all.